Welcome to the Venro e-learning video, which is about impact orientation in development cooperation projects. I want to present some basic knowledge, and for this, I will talk in the beginning of the term impact because it's used very often, and I'm not sure whether we always understand the same thing. And then impact orientation makes a difference in planning if we compare to, let me say, older style of planning. And therefore, we will have a deeper look on the different levels of impact and also then on the intervention logic. And impact orientation makes also a difference when we talk about monitoring. It's quite more ambitious than perhaps also older style of monitoring. So let's start. Have a look. When we talk about impacts, then we are talking about changes in a condition or in a behavior or attitude as a result of an intervention. And this is important because it means that not any change is an impact. We only can it call impact when it's because of our project activities, if it's due to our intervention. And when we talk about impacts, there are many different kind of impacts. They can be planned or unplanned. They can be expected or unexpected. They can be direct or indirect. So, for example, if farmers are trained in sustainable agricultural techniques, the direct effect is that they now use fewer or perhaps even no chemicals anymore. And the indirect effect is then that the demand for chemicals, fertilizers decreases. And we can also differentiate impacts according to whether they arise in the short, medium, or long term. And of course, there are positive and negative impacts. Of course, we plan only for positive impacts. However, what can happen, what has happened, and what will happen again, that we create also negative impacts. And that's very important also for our monitoring to be aware that we can also cause some negative results. So in general, monitoring, impact-oriented monitoring becomes a bit more ambitious than perhaps the style we have done before. Impacts, impacts, impacts. But why have they become so popular? Why is it now a newer approach? Yes, the aspiration to work more impact-oriented began with the new millennium and was reflected in the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and after 2015 in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and is also stated as one principle of the Paris Declaration, which says that result-oriented management, this is another term for impact-oriented management, that this result orientation or impact orientation in resource management and corresponding improvements in decision-making processes are important for effective development cooperation. But because there were many experiences where development cooperation was not that effective. Donors had different styles, and perhaps the partner organization in the countries had different styles. And we just could tell something about activities which we have carried out, but not really, saying something about the real improvements for the beneficiaries. And so also Venro, in its 8 guidelines for development policy project and program work, has taken up this claim, and it states that non-governmental organizations carry out effective development project work when they work together to achieve lasting positive results, especially for people living in poverty and for marginalized groups. And in doing so, the conditions for the sustainability of the positive effects in the long term. What is now really new when we come to an impact-oriented planning approach? As with any other project, a situation analysis needs to be carried out in the very beginning, either focusing on problems to be solved or on untapped potentials. The starting point is that all relevant stakeholders for this future project come together and develop a shared vision. So, meaning that they decide together where to go, and only afterwards they define how to get there. If we have now, as a result of the situation analysis, that the health situation in a community is quite problematic, and especially for children, because one has seen that the mortality rate is quite high, especially for children perhaps under 5. And it was analyzed that there are many factors which are responsible for this, like sufficient and nutritious food, good drinking water, vaccinations, psychosocial conditions, and so on, all have an influence on the health situation of the whole family and especially for children. And normally, in such a case, each factor isn't option for a future project, but it's not possible for a single project to pursue all options at the same time. So a choice has to be made. Where will our project make a difference? An important criterion for such a decision is, for example, what factor strongly influences our vision of a healthy family? Where really can we make a difference with our resources and so on? Yes, and so we have also found out that clean drinking water is very important and can have even a rather quick impact. And we know that so far people take water from the river nearby, and this water is often very dirty. And this leads to many illnesses, especially diarrhea, affecting children very often so that they die. So we ask which changes are necessary to realize our vision of a healthy family. And if we have now clean drinking water in our focus, so we know that for having a healthy situation, we need clean drinking water. So people have to use this clean drinking water. For this, we have to construct a new water stand, because the river is not a solution at all. And when we have to build it, we need also to plan for it. So the big difference to perhaps former planning is we do not start with our activities and direct outputs, so the services we can provide, the products we can deliver. And then we look, okay, with our resources and the activities we are able doing, what can we achieve at the end? But we start with the change, the improvement we want to see, and ask then step by step, what really is necessary to realize this vision? And at the end, then we can decide what key activities are necessary for that. And here's the example again in a written form. So if we really want then as focus the decline of the child mortality rate, we have to improve the health status of children. In which change is necessary for that? We have to make sure that the waterborne diseases decline. Then the next question is again, okay, what kind of change is necessary to achieve this level? And then we say, okay, then it's necessary that family now use clean water instead of this dirty river water. And what is necessary that family use clean water? Okay, therefore, as a new water supply system has to be functional, but it's not just the construction of such a system which will help. We need also a water supply committee, which is established. And established means in this sense that they are not just form, but they are also able to, yes, fulfill its responsibilities, and they are also doing so. And however, we also know the waterborne diseases and clean water, what is really important, that a lot of hygiene measures are accepted and are, yes, applied. So we need also creating more awareness among the beneficiaries on hygiene and, of course, also sanitation. And all this we can call then the positive intended effects of a project. Of course, this is perhaps a simplified example. In reality, the necessary changes can be much more diverse and perhaps even less straightforward and more interconnected. And so it might look more like a mind map. However, the various steps can be assigned to different levels of impacts. And these different levels of impacts, then they also will tell us when we can classify our projects as successful. Yes, successful projects often were defined when the three changes which we have defined here at the bottom, that beneficiaries are aware of hygiene, that the water supply system is functional, and the water supply committee is established, when these three changes were achieved. Because this is what a project has under its control. It has the knowledge, the experience, the necessary time, the resources, and so on. And this is what a project exactly provides for the beneficiaries in that community. And this is under your control. Everything else, what happens afterwards, as further change, is something which is not under your control. And impact orientation means now that, however, it is your responsibility that this is going to happen. And only if this happens, then your project will be classified as successful. So a project has to be aware whether family use clean water or not. Therefore, they need to know whether beneficiaries apply their knowledge on hygiene measures, whether the household members fetch water at the new water supply system and they do not use the river water anymore for drinking purpose. And one has also to check whether the water supply committee is really managing the water system properly. All this is now a major point of monitoring. Only then we know, only when we achieve that family use clean water, then we can be rather sure that we will achieve the change we want to see, which is that the waterborne diseases decline. Because this is very, very close to our project intervention. We can say that our project intervention is mainly responsible for the change at that level. And this makes a difference to the other level, which we call our interest. We have an interest that children have an improved health status. Our water project is just one factor among others. We have seen it's also a question of good food, of vaccination, of psychosocial care, and so on. So, but since we are not starting activities for improving all these different factors, we will just contribute with our project to the changes in this area of interest, but we cannot be held fully responsible for this. And for the change at the mortality rate level, even less. So here we contribute to societal change. With these different levels, we have now created our intervention logic. Other organizations call it also impact chain, and even other organizations call it result chain. It's all the same. just with different terms. And this in general is a bit confusing, that different organizations use different terms for the same thing. So when we have now our sphere of control, which are the activities and the outputs of a project, for the output, other organizations perhaps call it sometimes immediate result or specific results. And when we talk about our sphere of responsibility, which is the use of output, which is, let me say, a sub-result of the outcome level. Some other organizations call this outcome level, for example, also project objective. And there are also other terms. And the sphere of our interest, which we call in our example impact level, other organizations call it, for example, goal. Yes, unfortunately, this is confusing that in the intervention logic, sometimes only the most far-reaching change is called impact. And then at the same time, impact is also used as a general term to describe changes caused by an intervention. And also, as I already mentioned, some organizations use result as term from output to impact. This makes communication a bit difficult. So when talking about impact, it's helpful and necessary to clarify how you understand it and how the other person with whom you are discussing understands it. For the output and outcome level, you will have to define indicators. For the impact level, normally not, because it's just a level where you're contributing to only bigger interventions, which have a large program with different projects working on all factors relevant for that impact, or programs with cover a whole area. They perhaps have indicators at impact level, but yes, single projects not. Now, you take a look at the intervention strategy of your project and check whether the outputs, the outcome and impact correspond really to the defined different spheres of control, responsibility, and interest. And if not, how should it be? Think about it and then discuss it with your colleagues. This would be your first assignment. Fill in the first column of the log frame or logical framework, where you just, also have the impact, outcome, output level. And for the log frame as such, then you define just some key activities for each output. And I told you that the planning is different compared to former times, because you are starting with the vision and you end with activities and not starting with activities. And that there's also a difference when we talk about impact-oriented monitoring. Because as you have perhaps already experienced, the plan is often in a way that you hope that you achieve something straightforward from A to B. But reality is often a bit more complicated. The course of the project is usually not straightforward from A to B. And we have to check at regular intervals whether we are on track or not. Impact-oriented monitoring. There we look beyond project activities, products, and services. Here, I think I already mentioned it in the beginning, we have to ask, are the products and services, so our output level, are they being used? And are they being used in the way, yes, we planned for? And if they are being used, can we see the expected consequences? So do we really reach the improvement which we want to see? Monitoring and also for evaluation, we have to check whether we are on the right path to realize our vision. And there, of course, we are starting with the impact monitoring, checking whether activities, when they have been conducted, that we check whether the outputs have been achieved. And when outputs have been achieved, then our next monitoring step is to check whether these outputs are used or not. This impact-oriented monitoring is necessary, and the findings can be used for steering, for learning, for reporting, and accounting purpose when they are available at the right time. So this is when we need them for these different purposes. And they have also be relevant in practice for our implementation. And relevant in practice means that they deliver us information which help us to decide if we have to adjust our strategy. So we need to decide which data is needed, perhaps beyond log frame indicators. It might be that the indicators are not enough. The log frame indicators are just the minimum which we need for our monitoring. But we need to see and to decide what are the most critical changes for the success of our strategy. And these are the monitoring findings which are then relevant for our decisions whether we have to adapt our strategy or not. And monitoring findings are also useful when they are integrated into decision-making processes, a normal part of relevant team meetings, to look at the monitoring findings and then, based on these findings, decide whether the project can continue as originally planned. And this does not depend on whether all activities have already been carried out as planned. No, it depends on whether the desired changes in the sphere of responsibility, if they occur as a result of the outputs provided. So if we don't see that families are not using the clean well water, we have to ask ourselves, why not? Maybe our strategy wasn't the best from the start, or maybe something has changed in the context so that the original strategy no longer works. However, we need to decide where to adjust our planning. And this could mean that we should carry out more activities, or perhaps other activities. Perhaps we should conduct our awareness campaigns also in an additional language which is used in this community. Or it could also mean that things are already going very well, even though, for example, all awareness campaigns have not yet been carried out. In that case, some activities could also be cancelled and the resources could possibly be used for something else. So only our findings from this monitoring will tell us how to change our activities. So this is why our monitoring findings have to be part of our decision-making process, or be the center of our decision-making process. And this is why our focus, when we talk about impact-oriented monitoring, is on results rather than activities and inputs. It does not mean that a project has not to monitor activities and inputs. Of course, this will be done anyway because of checking your budget and so on and so on. But when we talk about impact-oriented monitoring, then we talk about monitoring beyond outputs. So let's come back to our example. The 3 outputs, which I'm circling here, have been delivered. We cannot automatically assume that our outcome, the decrease of waterborne diseases, for which we are responsible, will be achieved because our 3 outputs have been delivered. We need to check whether the outputs are being used as needed. And even if the log frame does not contain any indicator for this important step, the project team should decide to develop an own indicator for their own steering purpose and to decide what is really the critical change which needs to happen. And in our case, it's that family use clean water. If this is not happening, then we cannot expect that we will have some improvements in the decline of waterborne diseases because of our intervention. And such an indicator could be formulated as follows. One example. By September 2027, at least 70% of families in the villages ABC in region XXX access at least 15 liter per day per person. We know that this is the minimum for surviving from the new well throughout the year and do not use additional service water. Yes, and clean water is already defined here. The drinking water quality complies with WHO standards. Of course, this indicator should not be measured only at the end of the project, but for example, 4 weeks after the water system has been inaugurated. Why? Because if after 4 weeks, no one or perhaps only very few people of this community are using the water from the new well or ignoring their hygiene measures, etc., it can be assumed that things will not get better after this 4 weeks. We can already know that our strategy is not working as planned, and we need to think about what we need to do now. Are the opening hours of the new water stands? Are they perhaps impractical? Have people not understand their hygiene measures properly? Is a follow-up necessary? Or what is the reason why family are not using the clean water? So the step where people apply, use the results which we have provided is, I repeat it, very important to ensure that the improvement, fewer waterborne diseases, is achieved and is therefore central to our decision on how to proceed with the project. It's not the question of working through all the planned activities, but of seeing what is really needed to achieve the planned changes at the outcome level. This is the responsibility of the project, and this is the focus of project steering during the implementation phase of the project. So impact orientation makes monitoring definitely more challenging than pure activity and output monitoring. And it's the only way to ensure real improvements for the beneficiaries. And that's why projects are existing. Go back to your project intervention and check whether you can describe exactly what beneficiaries do differently when they use the services outputs provided by your project. And can you measure this progress? So what in my example was the step that families use clean water. Can you really identify this step in your project? And if not as part of your log frame, can you describe it for your own reflections? And can you measure whether there is a progress or not? Because this is central for your project steering. And when you have there a positive answer, so when really the beneficiaries use the products and services provided by your project, how will you know if the expected change, the outcome is occurring? Have you good indicators which you can already measure before the end of the project? Can you link the first step where you check the application of the services and outputs to the change which you want to have at outcome level? So this is still something where you as a project can improve your monitoring beyond the monitoring which is necessary for reporting to the donor. And then at the very end, there's also a short test to check your knowledge. And you see here the QR code, which you can use. And perhaps it makes even sense to do it before you apply the assignments to check whether, yes, you have understood what the main difference is to former planning and monitoring. So I wish you fun and good luck with the test, and especially success with your project. And don't get frustrated. Impact orientation is a bit more ambitious, but at the end, ensures that you really do a good work and which makes a difference to the beneficiaries.